Jackie Lewis, meet Pythias Makonese, a student from De Montfort University. I'm studying film studies and journalism. We are assigned a number of assignments whereby we can conduct them with people who are interested like you. So it is a great opportunity that I've met you. I would like to start from getting to know your background.
Okay, that's fine. Nice to meet you as well.
You can just self-introduce yourself.
Okay, right. My name's Jackie Lewis. I'm, I suppose at the end of the day, I am of Irish heritage, which is important for you to know in terms of the background and how I grew up. I'm not actually from Leicester. I'm actually from Derby, but travelled around a bit. But more importantly than that, my whole outlook has been informed by the fact that my parents were children of immigrants from Ireland. And society's changed quite a lot now, but we were informed by the feeling of always being other. And I know that many people in Leicester, because it's very multicultural, will understand what I mean by that. So when my mum was growing up, and she was one of 13 children, because they were Irish Catholics from the south of Ireland, when she was growing up, it was quite a big wave of Irish immigration that came into the northwest of the country. And with that, there was quite a lot of hostility from the English people. But obviously it's different from race, as in colour, because you couldn't see it. But prior to all the other waves of migration, the Irish migration was just as important and did impact on the country, but also impacts on the Irish immigrants themselves in the way they saw themselves. And of course, because I was Catholic, I was taken to all Catholic schools all the way through. And it is quite noticeable I notice now looking back that I never, because of that education and because of where my parents came from, because of religion, I never felt part of England, and I was never taught patriotism, ever, because all the nuns that taught us were Irish, and they were more interested in teaching you about the saints and the Reformation and how Irish people and Catholic people were treated badly by the English. And so I find it quite difficult, and have through my life, when people have said to me, well, why aren't you patriotic? And I thought, well, it's never been there in the first place, patriotism. I've never felt that England was great. I've never felt that England was, I'm more entitled to things in this country than other people. And I suppose all that has informed my way of life and my politics and even the work that I do. So that's why it's important to kind of understand, for me anyway, understand the background of where I've come from, because it formed everything that I've done in my life after that.
Can we know when you were born and where you are living right now?
I was born in Derby on a council estate, and again, Pythias, I'm not sure if you will get this really, but class is a big thing in this country. And I thought everybody lived in a council house when I was growing up, everybody. And it was only when I was about 21 that I eventually went to Polytechnic, which was the old style universities, that I realised everybody didn't live in a council house, and there was actually quite a lot of people who had very, very different lifestyles, including vegetarians and etc, etc. So it was quite an eye-opener. But basically I was born in Derby.
Which year was it?
Which year? 1963.
Okay.
So I was brought up in the swinging 60s, but it wasn't swinging for us. It was still quite hard. My mum worked nights and my dad worked days, so they didn't have much of a relationship, to be honest, bringing us three up. So, but eventually they worked so hard that they could take us away from that environment, because again, in those days, although people don't know it, we were the only Catholics in that street. And because we went to a different school from everybody else and we're a different religion, there was a lot of prejudice against us. So we regularly got smacked and people wouldn't talk to us. And my mum regularly got bullied by the neighbours next door. And now I can hardly believe it happened, but that was my experience of being brought up in Derby, in Alveston. So eventually, because they'd worked hard, they managed to move us to a village when I was about 12 in Belper, Derbyshire, which was absolutely beautiful, but it had its own issues in the sense that everybody knew each other. and we were the outsiders again coming in.
Okay.
And again we went to a different school in Derby, where all the other kids in Belper in the village went to the village school in Belper. So and also what I realised, because I'd had a balance of living in the city and now I was in the village. People in the village through my teens were absolutely really ignorant to everything else. It was a little insular world, and I was mixing with people from all kinds of different backgrounds in Derby, and then when those worlds collided, it was a problem. And I can remember when I was a teenager, I had a friend called Ekwel Twana. He was a Sikh, and I invited him up to go out for a drink in Belper, and people came up to me and I won't swear, but said, "What the effing are you doing with that?" And I was completely shocked. And I thought, oh my God. And as a result of that, the more I came across that through my teenagehood, the more I wanted to leave. Even though it's a beautiful environment, I wanted to get back to the city, because I thought, actually, I belong there more than I do here in this little village where there's no poverty. No poverty, I would say, more or less. No unemployment, and there was in the cities. Very insular lifestyle.
So would you say all your education, you acquired all your education in Derby or in other places you can?
Secondary school and Catholic secondary school, Catholic primary school in Derby, Catholic secondary school in Derby, and then I went to work for British Railways because I failed at school. The environment wasn't right. I wasn't happy at school, so I failed everything, and I went to work for British Railways where my dad worked. But that was a bit of a dead end, and I've been brought. My mum and dad brought us up to be very questioning about things, and I realised after a couple of years it wasn't going to be enough. And I realised that I looked around me and I saw all these women in this kind of like office, in long lines typing away there, and I realised very early on the only way you got out of there was to get pregnant or get married, and I thought, oh my God. I have got so much I want to do, so much of the world I want to see. This isn't going to be my end. So I went and cried to my mum and dad and I said, please let me, I know I failed at school, please let me go back. Please let me go back to college. And they let me go back. And, you know, in terms of inspirational people, I met this wonderful Polish sociology teacher. And she was the first person that inspired me about education, the first person. And for the first time I got a decent grade in something, just because it tapped something inside of me that made me think, wow, I want to learn more. And as a result of that, I went to Polytechnic in Portsmouth, which I absolutely loved, because it was a time that was very political in this country in the 1980s, and it was the big miners' strike, the 12-month-old miners' strike, which Margaret Thatcher brought about, and it was a time when the whole economic base of this country was changing from an industrial base and a very strong trade union base to a service base. And I was growing up at that time when there was mass unemployment in this country, when the unions were strong, when there were massive struggles, when people, for the first time, if you're involved with those struggles, you saw the state laid bare. And what I mean by that is, when I was at Poly, the miners' strike happened, and because Margaret Thatcher wanted to close all the pits. Now the pits were like massive industry in this country, and it was in fact the reason why my granddad from Ireland came over. He came to work in the pits. It was hard work, it was physically demanding, it was brutal, and many people died. And as a result of that, the trade unions were strong. And I can remember in 1972, even though I was, quite young then, I can remember the miners coming out on strike to defend the nurses' shouts for higher pay. That solidarity was that strong. And then in 1984, when Margaret Thatcher came in, she decided to destroy the pits, and she forced them out on strike. And those workers all over the country were out on strike for 12 months with no money, nothing. No money for gas, no money for electric, no money for the rent.
if
No
I can
income coming in.
interrupt you a bit, how far did you go with your education? And you can also include things like training if you went for training for the work you are doing.
Well, education of life, I'd say. Right. I did a degree in sociology,
Okay.
and then I left and I came back.
When was that?
That was about 87, 88.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to live in Nottingham, back to the Midlands, where I felt, I felt I had an affinity. It was near my parents and that.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a year unemployed,
Mm-hmm.
and then I thought, okay, I've got to get into work. What do I need to do? So I volunteered
Mm-hmm.
at a place called in St Anne's in Nottingham. It was an advice centre.
Mm-hmm. That was as a social worker?
No, it was welfare rights worker, so benefits advice.
Okay.
So I just went in there and I said to them, I'm a student, I've finished, I've got nothing to do, and I want to learn. So I trained welfare rights. They basically took me on as a volunteer, and I worked there for 4 years.
Okay.
And gradually, I started working 1-2 days a week. Eventually, I started working there full time. So they trained me up myself, gave me the welfare rights book, trained me up, and then eventually I worked there for about 4 years giving benefits advice, which was brilliant because you do see the other side of life. You saw people then who had absolutely nothing, and you could see how hard they were struggling. Excuse me. How hard they struggled, and the organisation that I worked for was brilliantly grassroots. I can remember as part of my work, when they were trying to close a little bank in the area, going to do an occupation with all the old West Indian people that lived there. Did you know what I mean? It was an education, not a formal education, but it was an education. It was brilliant. So eventually I left there because the funding was running out, and I decided that I'd learnt everything I could do about welfare benefits.
Okay.
But now one of the issues that I could see was housing and lack of housing and how that was impacting on people's lives. So I and my sister told me that there was this course you could do, that they'd pay you to go back into education for 1 year, and you'd get a free trip, really, a field trip to a foreign country. And I thought, well, I'm young, I'm going to do it. I've got no children, so I can afford to do it. So I went on this course, so it took me to Birmingham, where I lived in Handsworth, to do a postgrad diploma in housing, which was brilliant because I got involved in politics a lot there. I mean, politics has been a theme that goes through all through my life. And then, as a result of that education, I became involved in housing, and I met a friend of mine who I wanted to work for a local authority. So I thought that was a good place to work because I wanted to learn about council housing. And I was really lucky. I've been very lucky in lots of different ways. I've fallen into lucky situations, and I wanted to leave Birmingham. And I asked someone that I knew in Leicester whether they could introduce me to anybody from the local authority, and they talked to this person in the meeting, and that person happened to be the assistant director of housing, and they invited me. She said, "Oh yeah, tell your friend, just send me a CV and we'll see what we can do." So I sent a CV over, and she said, "Right, come to Nottingham, I'll interview you." And I was interviewed, and she said, "Yeah, start as a student placement." So that's how I started in Leicester.
Okay.
And worked as a homelessness officer, which I didn't like.
And when was this?
Oh gosh, this was in the 90s now. I think 1995 this was.
That's when you moved to Leicester?
When I moved to Leicester in 1995, I was a student placement, and I worked in all various different areas of housing. And then I felt that the best bit of housing was housing advice. So that was really good because it brought me into it was how to get people housing, and because of my previous training, we were very good at finding loopholes in the housing's allocation policy to get people housed. And
so would you say since then you had been engaged in housing issues?
Yes.
Up to now, all different parts of housing. And now, after that, that part of the industry, if you like, closed down, and I had the opportunity to work in resettlement.
because we found ourselves in a situation in Leicester where we had adequate housing now. That was enough housing for everybody. In fact, in some places we had too much housing, but the problem is there was homelessness. So they started to look at, well, if we've got housing and we've got homeless people, what's happening? And what was happening was that people were getting housed but couldn't deal with their tenancies because of problems in their lives. So I joined a team in Beaumont Leys to try and identify what the problems were. And the problems were that they'd give them a house, but they wouldn't help them out with furniture, and there was low levels of education and also low levels of literacy and numeracy. So you were just plonking people in empty houses, and they didn't know how to cope. So we were sent.
So what would you say are or were the major issues of housing when you started within? What you can identify as the major problems?
There's a lot of people in every city and in Leicester also who have massive poverty, issues of poverty, and the poverty is post-generational, and so they're already pretty crushed in terms of their psychology, and so they leave school with low education, and then they get into a spiral of poverty, low self-esteem, lack of education, homelessness, sometimes drugs and alcohol, but not always, mental health. And so what I realised was that people need support. So we'd go into the property and we'd say, okay, right, we're going to help you now get your benefits sorted. And now we're going to help you get your furniture. We're going to help you get your gas and electricity. We're going to show you how to deal with your low amounts of money because it's on benefits. We'll show you how to deal with it, and then kind of build your self-esteem up and try and build your confidence up so you can live independently. So that's what we did, and then the little team turned into a service called Star, and then just recently, about 5 years ago, an opportunity to grew or came up for me to work with refugees, Syrian refugees, and that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years, resettling Syrian refugees, which is similar but different because we're talking about people who are newly arrived into the country, having been through trauma of war, and that brings with it a whole set of other issues that they have to overcome to resettle in the UK. So that's kind of a potted history of where I am now.
So since you've joined this housing department, what problems would you say you've managed to solve or reduce, and which ones are still outstanding, which you want to really work on?
Well, the problem is anyone that does support work, anyone that works with people in poverty and low income, it's like, you know, the boy with the dike. You know, there's society's problems coming towards you, right? And you have to stick your finger in to block the problems. So people on benefits have not got enough money to live on. Okay, so they're just about keeping their head above water. So, and a lot of them are facing eviction and rent arrears and multiple debt. So you're sorting those people's problems out one at a time. But the problem is there's so many problems because society's creating those problems that you solve a problem one at a time, right? So you solve it for about 12 months, and then that person, because they've not got enough money to live on, and because they've never been given opportunity and they've got low self-esteem and low mental health, they'll come round again. So it's like a revolving door, where in fact we should be tackling what creates poverty. It's unemployment. Why do people leave school with education? Because the education system isn't suited to many people and isn't supportive enough of many people. So you're trying to solve a societal problem through a role, and you can't do it. But at least you can help a few people. But we could help them a lot more if we change the way society operates.
And so apart from your housing issues, which you are really involved in, do you engage in other activities apart from your work activism?
Since I've been in my 20s, I've always been involved in political activity. And again, that stems back to the way I was brought up, because I could see things were wrong. Why was my dad working days and my mum working nights and still not having enough money and still worrying about whether they could pay the gas, whether they could pay the electric. I remember Mum telling me stories about having to, walk round asking for work, knocking on doors with cardboard in the bottom of a shoe. And it struck me, all of us in our family, that it didn't want this to keep happening. And so obviously, and they were political. My dad was a trade unionist. My mum was very political because of her upbringing, being from an Irish migrant background. And so I became involved in a revolutionary organisation called the Socialist Workers' Party, because that wants to change society, that wants to bring about equality.
How did you join that? Is it just because of your own thinking, or someone influenced you?
I think my parents influenced me a lot, but I think that when I went to Polytechnic during that miners' strike, I met some young socialists, and they were collecting money and food for miners all over the country, and they took me down to the pits, and I got involved in the picketing. And also as well with the Catholic Church, I was very pro women's rights and pro abortion rights, which was absolutely against the Catholic Church. So I became involved in feminism. Well, I wanted rights for equal rights for women. I wanted equal rights for working class people. I wanted equal rights for black people, and I wanted equal rights for lesbian and gays. Socialism embraced all of those things for me.
Okay.
And society creates all of those problems and divides us. So I could see that all these issues, they presented themselves separately, but actually it was one system that was creating all the problems and all the division. And I wanted to tackle the system, and that stuck with me right through my life. So as a result of that, I got involved in many movements, including the Anti-Nazi League in the 1980s, which was against the rise of the National Front, and in the 90s, and that was the Anti-Nazi League, which again was about bringing black and white people together to isolate the growing Nazi movement that was brought about by the not the EDL, it was the British National Party, and then again, and the Anti-Nazi League, and now Stand Up to Racism, when we've got yet again to fight against the rise of the far right, with the likes of the English Defence League and Tommy Robinson. And of course, I think the world system is now in a much deeper, graver situation. We've got Donald Trump in America, creating massive issues in terms of his racism and his flirting with the forces of the white supremacists. And then we've got Boris Johnson in this country, and who has brought us we're about to go into a massive recession. We know that's going to bring mass unemployment, and we know already they're starting to talk about immigration. And I've seen this circle of thing happens all over again. There's the system goes into recession, and everyone starts talking about who's to blame, and it's always immigrants. But it never stops there. It never stops at refugees. Then they start to look at the Indians. Then they start to look at the West Indians. Then start to look at the Kurdish. Do you know what I mean? And they whip the white population into this idea that these are the enemy. These are the people taking your jobs. When it's always been the state. It's always been a class divide, and we have to keep fighting until people recognise that.
Since you said you had been involved in a number of these activities, can you just identify one which you really actively think you did put much of your effort, and why?
I think when I was in the most recent one, I'm involved in politics now, but recently, about late 1990s, with the English Defence League, when the English Defence League decided that they would march through the city of Leicester, and I worked for the local authority, and there was a problem, because at that time the establishment, the local authority, believed that what we should do, we should allow the English Defence League to march, and everyone should keep outside of the city centre. And I thought, hang on a minute. And my organisation, which was the Anti-Nazi League and the Socialist Workers' Party, we thought, hang on a minute, this is like one of the most multiracial cities outside of London, and we've all got to stay at home while these people from outside come and march on our streets, stirring up racial hatred. And I thought, no. So what we did was we decided that we would oppose, if you like, the local authority, and we would say, no, what we're going to do, we're going to have a peaceful counter demonstration. These are our streets. These streets should be safe for every single person in Leicester, irrespective of race, gender, nationality, where you come from. And I was not going to be told to stay behind closed doors because Nazis and fascists were marching the street. And there was about 10 of us, to be perfectly honest, and we were absolutely terrified. The police were harassing me. The police were ringing my workplace and trying to tell me to back off. I was having pressure from work telling me that I shouldn't be involved in this, and I had to say no. When I'm at work, I don't do politics. When I'm outside of work, I do politics.
So are you saying you were one of the chief organizers?
I called the demonstration. So, and the police said to me that if anyone committed any kind of crime on that demonstration, I was going to get arrested. And they hand-delivered this letter to my door, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, and I'm probably going to lose my liberty. But I thought, but this is how things change, isn't it? Someone's got to stand up, and if we don't stand up now, it's going to keep creeping. And we did stand up, and we went to every community centre, we went to every we had mass meetings, we called people together, and there was a mass demonstration at the clock tower, twice actually, and the fascists on that day did march, but they faced opposition. And I think that in a way that changed the way people responded to it, because people were scared. We showed, and the people that attended that demonstration showed, you cannot be scared to these people, you have to stand up to these people, and we're strong together. And then a few years later, just around when Brexit started to be talked about, I remember an organisation called Britain First came into town, and just giving leaflets out, and we knew what they were about. Britain First, the people that storm into mosques, they're nasty bunch of fascists. And so we happened to be going to town with me and my sisters, and there were some people down there already, so we just got on the megaphone and we started to call people of Leicester and tell people to Leicester what was going on. And you know what, there was a change in the level of confidence. And as we shouted to people with other socialists, come stand with us, don't let these people spread racial hatred. Gradually, a big crowd of people from all walks of life. It was beautiful, truly beautiful. Black, white, young, Iranian, Iraqi, Kurdish, African, Indian, and they stood there and they told these people to go home.
And what means of communication or advocacy do you use so as to bring such a big gathering which you are mentioning?
What kind of advocacy? I think that
do you send out leaflets? Do you announce on the radio? Do you put in the newspapers?
Yeah. We sell a newspaper. With the Socialist Workers' Party, we have a weekly newspaper, and that's to counter the ideas, because as we already counter the ideas of mainstream ideas, I mean, because most of the media is owned by 3 or 4 big media moguls, and their interests lie with the ruling class. So we don't really know what's going on in society. So we sell newspaper, a national newspaper that's sold in every street, every city in Leicester. So that's the Socialist Workers paper. We also do a lot of meetings, Zoom meetings. My organisation, Socialist Workers Party, is also connected to Stand Up to Racism, and actually today there's an international conference today at 5 o'clock, and we'll be talking to and discussing racism and the rise of fascism with people all over the world, because we're trying to form an international movement of anti-fascism. Just like the Nazis are networking globally, well, the anti-fascists need to network globally as well. So yeah, radio wherever we can. We've got SWP TV, which you can watch on YouTube. We've got a local paper. We've got journals. We've got our own bookshop called Bookmarks in London. You know, so it's a very strong, well organised, revolutionary movement, international movement that I'm part of.
And then can I just try to find out what's the response from what you are trying to do or what you are doing in trying to solve some of these problems we have just discussed? What's the response? How do people respond? And then any changes?
The changes become gradual. At the beginning, you know, because people are listening to the dominant, like for example, COVID-19, they're listening to COVID-19 all the time, COVID-19, which is right, okay? But you listen to the narrative is that it's these young people. That's the problem with COVID-19. It's the young, or if you listen to Donald Trump, it's China. It's all happening from China. In this country, it's young people, it's the students that are starting it. It's the people in Liverpool. They're the problem with COVID-19. When in reality, the problem of COVID-19, it lies with Boris Johnson, because he never took the lockdown seriously. He put profits before people. He never closed the economy down properly. And because he never closed the economy down properly, now we've got a pandemic, and the rise of COVID is going up and up and up in this country and across Europe, because of course all Europe is capitalist, and they've all put the economy first. You know, so at the moment we're pretty much lone voices with COVID-19. We're saying to people, don't blame students for COVID-19, don't blame ordinary people for spreading COVID-19. Look to the government, look to the track and trace system that isn't up and running in this country. And the reason why it's not running up and running in this country, because they've given the contracts to private enterprise. It's jobs for the boys. In Ireland, they've got a track and trace system that costs a fraction of the price that it's costing in this country, and it works. We've not got one. So people are going to die as a result of incompetence, and because this government has constantly backed private enterprise at the expense of public bodies like the National Health Service, like NHS England, all those bodies. They've ignored those people and gone to private companies to solve the problem. And who pays? Ordinary people pay with their lives, and now